Rain slicked the wooden planks of Rhinor, 7's floating markets, turning each walkway into a shining vein of light where lanterns glowed against the haze. Traders shouted from every direction, voices carrying over the steam that rose from kettles and pots. The air was a mix of wet wood, swamp musk, and the sharp spice of cinnamon drifting from Hector Dorr's stall. His counter stood out not for its noise, but for its order jars stacked in measured rows, scales balanced to the gram, every motion deliberate. Hector moved with the precision of a man, still carrying discipline like armor, his posture straight, his eyes never lingering where they shouldn't. He scooped tea into a clay cup, folded a paper sachet, handed back exact change, and already reached for the next jar before the customer had stepped aside. 36 years of living, half of them in service to the Federation, and the last few in exile, had carved him into something both rigid and weary. Discharge for dishonor, they had called it. He called it conscience, but conscience paid no rent. The stall, his license, and the careful rhythm of trade, it was all that kept him afloat above the swamp. The line shuffled forward beneath dripping awnings. Hector barely glanced at the faces, cataloging coins more than expressions. Then the rhythm faltered. Someone cut the line. Rainwater dripped from her torn wrap onto his counter. She was taller than most, thin from hunger, her purple hair plastered dark against the curve of her cheeks. Her skin gleamed faintly blue in the lantern glow, rain tracing lines down her collarbone. She set her palms flat on the wood, fingers trembling though her voice, when it came, was steady. "For a warm drink," she whispered, sharp gold eyes fixed on his. "I can take care of you behind the counter." The words landed like a blade edge against quiet. A ripple moved through the stall. Men at the back of the line turned their heads. One chuckled low. Hector didn't look at them. He kept his gaze locked on hers. Her offer wasn't coy, wasn't even seductive, it was raw, survival stripped of pride. He'd heard that tone before, in shattered colonies where hunger ate through. Dignity long before it ate through flesh. He recognized desperation when it tried to disguise itself as bargain. For a long breath, neither moved. Steam curled upward between them, mingling with the mist of rain. Inside, Hector felt the weight of choice settle. He could send her away and keep the stall safe from whispers. He could take her offer and degrade them both. Either path would be easy. Instead, he reached for a clay cup, ladled steaming tea from the kettle, and set it before her. "Drink first," he said. The men behind her muttered, but the stall was his, and his voice was even enough to cut through them. She hesitated, staring at the rising steam, as though unsure it was truly hers. Then she lifted the cup, hands white from how tightly she gripped it, and drank in small, careful gulps. Her shoulders eased almost imperceptibly, the shiver in her fingers slowing as the warmth spread. Hector studied her quietly, reading more in silence than in any confession. Hunger, exhaustion, fear, and yet behind it, that glint in her eyes that refused to die. He didn't ask her name, not yet. He only nodded toward the cup as if that were enough. Around them, the market surged on, voices calling, rain drumming, lanterns burning, but for a moment, within the narrow space of his stall, survival was redefined, not by the currency of flesh, but by the dignity of offering warmth, without cost. And in that moment, Hector knew, whatever trouble followed her to his counter, he would not turn her away. The rain hadn't stopped by morning, but the markets never waited for weather. Lanterns swung in the mist, their flames bending with every gust, and the walkways filled with the shuffle of boots and the sharp calls of vendors eager to undercut one another. Hector Dorr's stall smelled of ginger and cinnamon, steam rising from kettles that hissed against the chill. He moved with his usual precision, scooping leaves, tying packets with tight knots, arranging jars so each label faced forward. Every gesture was measured, as though the stall itself depended on the discipline of his hands. When the line pressed forward, she was there again. Not in front this time, but standing to the side, hood drawn low over damp hair. The cup from last night had steadied her, but hunger still sat sharp on her cheekbones. Hector felt her eyes on him as he served 3 customers in quick succession. Then, as if pulled by something heavier than choice, she stepped to the counter. "Let me help," she said. Her voice carried less desperation this time, more resolve. "Behind the counter. I can do it." Hector looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing scales only he could see. The safe thing would be to refuse send her into the flow of the market before the whispers grew louder. But when his gaze met hers, gold eyes sharp beneath the hood, he saw no flattery in them, no trick, only determination. He lifted the latch on the narrow side gate. "Then watch closely," he said. The stall shrank around them as she stepped inside, wet shoulder brushing his sleeve. It smelled of rain on skin, of exhaustion and something electric beneath. Hector's motions slowed, deliberate for her to see. Measure with the brass scoop. Fold the paper tight. Seal with string. She mirrored him, fingers clumsy at first, but fast to learn, her hands steadier than her trembling frame suggested. Customers didn't care who weighed the leaves as long as whom. The knots held, yet Hector noticed how her eyes lingered on the coins, counting each with the accuracy of someone who had lived on margins too thin to allow mistakes. How her fingers tied the strings with quiet precision, scars faint across her knuckles. Not the hands of someone who begged, but of someone who had worked once until stripped of it. "Serena," she said quietly when the rush thinned, as though offering her name cost her something. "Hector," he replied, "nothing more." Names were enough. The rhythm carried them through the morning. She poured samples, folded sachets, stacked the neat rows he insisted upon. Whispers still clung to the air. Men leaned on counters across the lane, watching too long. One customer smirked as he asked for the new woman's blend, loud enough for others to hear. Hector didn't look up. "House recipe," he said flatly, voice leaving no room for mockery. A man paid and walked off. When the line faded and rain softened to drizzle, Hector pulled the canvas curtain halfway, dimming the stall. He set a dry cloth on the counter and handed it to her. "Dry off," he said. She pressed it to her hair but paused, watching him with that steady, testing gaze. "I meant what I said before," she told him, voice low, stripped of pretense. "I don't expect anyone to give me drink for nothing." "I didn't," Hector said. He stepped closer, lifted the cloth gently, and dried the strands at her neck with slow, careful strokes. She didn't move away. Her breath caught once, but she held still. Steam curled between them, the lantern glow soft on their faces. For a moment, the market noise outside vanished. It was only his hand on her shoulder, firm, protective, and her eyes fixed on his as though trying to read why he hadn't treated her like every other man before. He set the cloth aside. "Stay behind the counter," he said simply, like an order already decided. Relief flashed across her face, so sharp it frightened her. Trust was dangerous. She knew it. And yet, in the space of Hector's stall, with rain dripping steady from the awning, she realized survival could mean more than barter. It could mean belonging, even if only for a day. And that frightened her more than the rain or the whispers. Ever could the rain turn the market into a blur of lantern light and shadows. Planks glistened slick underfoot, boots slapping water into shallow sprays. By midday, Hector's stall was busy enough to draw attention, and not just from customers. Whispers had already seated themselves along the lane. The cloth seller across. The way leaned too often on his counter, eyes narrowed in judgment. The fishmonger muttered, "Outcast comfort," under his breath, loud enough for nearby ears. The air carried it all, every hiss of rumor cutting through the steam rising from kettles. Serena felt those stares like pricks against her skin. She kept her head bent to the work, measuring, folding, sealing, but her ears burned. Each laugh from a rival merchant felt sharpened, each side glance a weight pressing her down. She had been erased once already, back when her family's name was stripped from the archive rolls. She knew how quickly whispers hardened into exile. Hector moved as though nothing touched him, his hands precise, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed only on the work. When two municipal inspectors in long coats paused at the edge of their counter, Serena's heart climbed sharp into her throat. She had seen inspectors turn tiny irregularities into ruin, and now their gaze had settled directly on her. "Merchant." "Hector Door," the taller one said, voice flat, carrying just far enough for the listening stalls to hear. "Your ledger." Hector slid the book across the counter without hesitation. The columns were neat, margins exact, every coin accounted for. The inspector flipped through, expression unreadable. His partner, however, let his eyes linger too long on Serena. "Coworker?" he asked. "Co-proprietor," Hector answered. Before she could draw a breath, his tone was steady, unblinking. He pulled out a signed form, ink barely dry, and set it flat on the counter. "Filed this morning." Serena blinked. She hadn't seen him write it, hadn't even known he'd prepared. It, her name, written in black across the paper, stared back at her. Not as an exile, not as a shadow, but as partner. The inspector studied the form, frowned, then stamped the ledger with bored finality. "Probationary status," he said. "Performance reviewed in council." And with that, he and his partner moved on. The stall exhaled in silence. Serena realized. She had been gripping the edge of the counter hard enough to ache. She looked at Hector, words caught between her chest and throat. "You put my name down without asking," she said finally. "You wanted to stay," he replied, his voice clipped but not cold. "That's how you stay. No one removes you now, without taking me with you." She stared at him, disbelief tangled with something sharper. For months she had lived as temporary disposable. Now, without request, he had tied her survival to his own. When evening came, shutters pulled down and the market dimmed, she sat on the cot upstairs tracing the edge of the ledger with her fingertip. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "If they revoke your license because of me, you lose everything." Hector stacked the day's coins into neat piles. His movements never wavered. "Then I build again somewhere else," he said. "But you don't go back to the gutter." The words hit harder than the kiss they'd shared the night before. She turned her face away, afraid of how much she wanted to believe him. Outside, the rain drummed steady on the shutters. Inside, for the first time since her exile began, she felt the faint, terrifying weight of hope. Tomorrow, she knew the council would call her name. And this time, she would have to stand beside it. The storm thickened overnight, hammering the awnings like fists on metal. By the time the market stirred awake, rain ran in sheets down the planks, turning every step into a gamble. Still, buyers came. Hunger didn't wait for clear skies. Hector unlatched the shutters with the same unhurried discipline as always, steam from the kettles rising into the damp morning air. Serena stood beside him, arranging jars in neat rows, her fingers tracing the chalk labels she had rewritten the night before. At first, the day seemed ordinary. Coins clinked, sachets traded hands, steam curled from clay cups. But beneath the sea rhythm, Hector sensed the shift. Too many eyes watching, too many merchants leaning in with whispers. He had lived under command structures long enough to feel the pressure before it broke. It came with a shout. A man in a soaked coat shoved his way to the counter, holding a damp sachet aloft. "This," he said loudly, voice sharp enough to cut through the lane's hum, "is rot, moldy stock. You sold me this yesterday." Heads turned, whispers swelled. Serena stiffened, her throat dry. Hector took the sachet calmly, broke it open between his fingers, rubbed the leaf, brought it to his nose. His jaw tightened, not because it was theirs, but because it wasn't. The cut was wrong. The seal a forgery. A rival's hand was plain in it. "This isn't ours," Hector said, voice flat, carrying. "Not our seal. Not our cut." The man smirked, playing innocence for the crowd. "Looks the same to me. Smells the same too." He let the sachet fall onto the counter like proof, daring Hector to argue against rumor already spreading in the air. Serena felt panic claw at her chest. A probationary license could be stripped for less than this. If the crowd turned, inspectors would follow, and everything Hector had given her would collapse. She looked at him, expecting his calm to shield them, but saw in his eyes what he already knew silence would not save them. The trap had been set in daylight. Before he could speak, she stepped forward. Her voice rang out, sharper than she believed herself capable of. "Watch." She pulled down a jar of the same blend, measured it into a clay cup poured steaming. Water. The crowd leaned in as she brewed openly, her hands steady, though her pulse hammered. When the aroma rose clean, spiced, warm, she handed it to a woman near the front. "Taste it." The woman sipped, blinked, then nodded firmly. "This is clean. Better than most I've bought this week." The murmurs shifted. Serena seized the moment, holding up the false sachet. "Whoever sold this used damp stock and forged our mark. If you doubt me, bring any bag from yesterday with our seal. You'll see it's not the same cut. And if you want proof, watch me brew every cup you drink. We hide nothing." Her voice carried with a force that surprised even her. The accuser faltered, eyes darting as Hector's steady gaze locked on him. One by one, the crowd's eyes turned from the man back to her. Then a buyer spoke. "Give me 2 bags of the woman's blend." Another followed. 3 bags. A line. Reformed, larger than before, drawn by defiance and the chance to see an exile stand tall against insult. The man who had brought the sachet slipped away, muttering about a mistake. The rival across the lane scowled, his trick unraveling. Hector said nothing. He only slid fresh sachets across the counter. His calm presence anchoring the storm Serena had turned Dot by evening. Her hands were raw from tying string, but her eyes burned with something she had nearly forgotten pride. Upstairs, when the shutters closed and the market finally hushed, she sat on the cot, still trembling with the release of it. "If I hadn't spoken," she asked Hector quietly, "would they have believed you?" "Yes," he said simply, settling. "The ledger on the table. But they needed to hear it from you." Her throat tightened. "I've lived so long as nothing dismissed, traded, ignored. Today I spoke, and they listened. Not because of you, because of me." He looked at her, steady as ever. "That's what I wanted them to see. That's why your name is on the ledger, not mine alone." For the first time since exile, she believed him. And for the first time since the war, Hector felt the quiet certainty of a mission worth more than survival. Together, in that narrow upstairs room, they understood. The market could whisper, sabotage, and scheme, but they had claimed something no rumor could erase, and that terrified their enemies more than failure ever could. Night pressed heavy over the markets, the rain easing to a steady whisper against the shutters. Lantern light painted the small room above the stall in a dim amber glow. The day's clamor had faded, but the echo of it lingered in Serena's bones, accusations, whispers, the roar of her own voice defying them. She sat on the edge of the cot, hands pressed together to still their tremble. Though the fire in her chest would not settle, Hector finished stacking the coins into neat towers on the table. His movements were as steady as always, precise even in exhaustion. He closed the ledger, set it aside, then finally looked at her. For a moment, he simply studied her in silence, as if weighing her against the storm they had endured together. She broke first. "You never asked me why I offered myself to you that night." Her voice was quiet, but it cut the stillness like a blade. Hector didn't move. "I didn't need to. You should know." Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "I've made that offer before. When I had nothing left, most men laughed. Some took what I offered and threw me out anyway." She swallowed, her gaze fixed on the floorboards. "You didn't. I don't understand why." Hector leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His voice came calm but edged with conviction. "Because I saw you were starving, not begging. You weren't asking for pity. You were asking to stay alive. That's worth more than the words you used." Her chest constricted, breath catching hard. No one had ever spoken of her desperation without disgust. She turned her face away, afraid he would see the heat rising in her eyes. But he already had. He rose, steps measured, and crossed the small space to sit beside her on the cot. His presence was solid, grounding. "You're not a burden here. Don't mistake their whispers for truth." "But they can make it truth," she whispered back. "If they strip your license, you lose everything. And it'll be because of me." Hector's jaw tightened, but his tone remained firm. "Then I build again. But you don't vanish. Not while I breathe." She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. What she found there unnerved her more than the council or the market ever. Good certainty. Not fleeting desire, not impulse, but conviction. A soldier's steadiness turned toward her. Her voice came soft, trembling on the edge of disbelief. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," he said. "You stay. We work. The rest is noise." The word we landed like a stone in her chest. She hadn't belonged to a "we" in years, not since her family's name was erased. Something inside her cracked open. She reached, almost without realizing, her hand brushing his sleeve. He caught it gently, his palm warm against her scarred knuckles. For a long moment, they stayed like that, hands locked, silence filled only by the patter of rain. Then she leaned closer, the movement hesitant but deliberate. Their foreheads touched, breath mingling. When her lips brushed his, it was cautious at first, but when he answered, the restraint dissolved into something hungrier, fiercer. The kiss deepened, not born of desperation, but of defiance. Two exiles refusing to let the world reduce them to whispers. Her hands fisted in his coat, pulling him closer. His arm wrapped firm around her back, steadying her as if anchoring her against the storm outside. When they broke apart, her chest rose hard against his, breath unsteady. He rested his forehead against hers again, voice low, threaded with certainty. "You're here because I choose it, not because you begged for it. Remember that." She closed her eyes, tears hot against her lashes, and nodded. For the first time since exile, she allowed herself to want, not survival, not barter, but trust. And in that small upstairs room, with the market's judgment waiting beyond the shutters, she gave herself permission to believe him. That night, when she lay down, she didn't turn her back to him. She faced him instead, their hands locked between them. Outside, the rain fell steady, but inside, the silence was no longer born of fear. It was the fragile quiet of two people who had chosen each other and who knew the world would not forgive them for it. The rain broke at dawn, but the air felt heavier than ever. Hector sensed it as soon as he unlatched the shutters. The walkway outside was crowded, yet the flow of buyers bent away from his stall more often than it should have. Whispers clung to the damp air, thicker than steam. Serena arranged jars in, their neat rows, shoulders stiff, eyes sharp at the edges of the crowd. She didn't need to ask, she knew. Word had spread. By midday, the silence snapped. 3 officials in long coats appeared, clipboards tucked beneath their arms, boots splashing. Deliberate into puddles. 2 market watchmen followed, hands close to their batons. The lane hushed. Rivals leaned on their counters, faces bright with barely hidden satisfaction. The cloth seller smirked. The fishmonger muttered to anyone who would listen. About time. The lead official unrolled a notice stamped in red. His voice was clipped, cold. Merchant Hector Dorr, your stall is under review. Accusations of forged blends, improper goods, and unlawful partnership. His eyes slid to Serena and lingered, inviting the crowd to follow his gaze. Serena's throat went dry. It was happening every. Fear condensed into a single moment. She could already see the stall shutters nailed shut, the license revoked, Hector dragged down with her. She gripped the counter until her knuckles whitened. Hector didn't flinch. He took the notice, scanned it once, then set it aside with calm finality. You want proof? He said, his voice carrying. Watch. He pulled down jars one by one, lids opening under the lantern glow. The air filled with spice and steamed cinnamon, ginger, anise, each measure precise, each motion deliberate. He brewed in plain sight, pouring water, letting the leaves unfurl, the scent rise. No hidden tricks, no damp stock. Then Serena stepped forward. Her pulse hammered, but her voice carried steady. Taste it. She lifted the first clay cup to a woman she recognized from earlier in the week. The woman sipped, hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded sharply. Clean. Better than most. A ripple spread through the crowd. Another buyer stepped up, then another. Each tasted, each agreed. The official's expression soured as momentum shifted. Whispers turned, leaning in her favor. Serena didn't. Stop. She drew another jar, brewed again, her hand steady even as her chest quivered with adrenaline. Every jar, every blend, she said to the crowd. You may taste them all. We hide nothing. Hector stood silent beside her, letting her voice fill the ling. He didn't need to add weight. Her presence was enough. The accuser tried to press forward, muttering about forgeries, but Hector's stare froze him in place. Buyers began ordering on the spot, coins clinking, hands reaching for sachets, tied by Serena's swift fingers. Within minutes, the stall was busier than before. The accusation drowned beneath the surge of trust earned in open air. The officials conferred briefly, their clipped whispers betraying frustration. Then the lead one snapped his ledger shut. Probation continues. Any infraction will result in immediate suspension. He turned, coat whipping, and stalked away. The watchman followed, hoots splashing. The crowd exhaled all at once, voices rising, orders piling in. The cloth seller's smirk had vanished. The fishmonger turned away, lips pressed tight. When the shutters closed at dusk, Serena collapsed onto the cot upstairs, trembling with the release of it. Her hands still shook as she pressed them together. You could have lost everything today, because of me. Hector set the ledger on the table, unopened. His voice was calm, but edged. With heat, I knew the risk. I'll take it again tomorrow. She searched his face, desperate for hesitation, for a crack in his conviction. She found none. That steadiness unnerved her more than the inspector's had. Why? Her voice broke. Why do you keep choosing me? His hand lifted, firm against her cheek, tilting her face toward his. Because you're not something to discard. You've proven it every day since you walked into my stall, and I won't let anyone treat you otherwise. Her breath shuddered, the dam inside breaking. She pulled him down into a kiss urgent, hungry, no pretense left. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, her body pressed fully against his. The cot creaked under their weight, but neither cared. Their mouths met again and again, restraint falling away until only need remained out when at last they lay. Tangled, lantern burning low, her head pressed to his chest, she listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine tomorrow without dread. And Hector, stroking her back with slow, grounding motions, knew with absolute clarity the stall was no longer his alone to defend. Their fight was shared now. And no counsel, no rival, no whisper in the market would ever take that from them. The storm had cleared by dawn, leaving the air washed sharp and clean. Sunlight broke through thin veils of mist, glinting off the wet planks of the walkways. For once, the markets of Raynor, 7 stirred under pale light instead of rain. But Hector Dor felt the silence beneath the bustle, the kind of hush soldiers learn to fear, the calm before escalation. He opened the shutters anyway. Steam rose from kettles, familiar and grounding. Serena moved beside him, arranging jars with a steady hand. Buyers came in greater numbers than before, some curious, some supportive, some hungry for spectacle. More than once, Hector caught murmurs of the exile woman's blend. He didn't correct them. He let her name carry dot by evening, when shutters came down and the lantern upstairs burned low. Serena sat at the table with the ledger open before her. Her fingertips traced her name in black ink, lingering as though afraid it might vanish if she looked away. Hector stacked the day's coins, posture as disciplined as ever, but his eyes flicked to her more than the earnings. She broke the silence first. "You've tied yourself to me," she said softly. "But you don't know what that means." Hector paused, studied her. "Then tell me." Her breath shivered out. She had held it back for days, weeks even, but now the truth pressed too hard to keep buried. "I wasn't just exiled for hunger or theft, Hector. My family kept the archives records of our history, our names, our truths. When the council decided our past didn't belong, they erased it. Burned rolls, scattered pages, stamped us out as if we never were. I was the last one left who still carried the knowledge." She lifted her eyes, gold burning in the dim light. "That's why they stripped my name. Not because I was worthless, because I remembered what they wanted forgotten." The weight of her words pressed heavy in the narrow room. Hector leaned back slowly, the truth settling like a blade between them. He thought of the inspector's sharp eyes, the rival's zeal to see her gone. It hadn't just been spite or envy. It had been fear. Fear of the records she carried in her mind. "You're not just surviving," Hector said at last, voice low but certain. "You're dangerous to them." Serena flinched, but his tone wasn't accusation. It was recognition. He reached across the table, closed the ledger, and set his hand flat over hers. "All the more reason you don't vanish. Not now. Not ever." Her chest tightened. "If they discover, if they prove what I am, they'll burn this stall to ash. They'll take your license, your roof, your life, just to silence me. Then—" "Let them try," Hector said. His eyes held hers, calm as ever, but edged with fire she had only glimpsed before. "I've faced worse odds for less cause. If your truth threatens them, it's worth defending." For the first time in years, Serena felt the burden of memory shift. She was not carrying it alone. Outside, the market settled into uneasy quiet, but shadows gathered at its edges. Rival merchants whispered with enforcers. The council's grip tightened. Somewhere below, boots clicked deliberate against the planks, a rhythm too heavy for casual trade. Upstairs, Hector drew the shutters. Closed. Serena leaned into his side, heart pounding with both fear and a strange, stubborn hope. Dawn would bring confrontation, perhaps worse. But she knew one thing now with certainty. Whatever storm rose next, she would not face it as a ghost. And Hector Dorr, dishonored pilot turned merchant, had found a new mission. Not just survival, but the defense of a woman whose voice could rewrite the market's truth. As the lantern guttered low, the first knock sounded at the stall door below. Firm, measured, the kind of knock that came from men who carried authority and weapons. The storm was not over. It was only beginning.